Picture this. You're a crew member working on a massive cargo ship right in the middle of the Indian Ocean. You spot a tiny blip on the radar. Suddenly, speedboats are racing toward you at over 25 knots. Now, your cargo ship can only do about 18, maybe 20 knots, so there's literally no way you're outrunning them. Within minutes, you hear this terrifying sound of metal scraping against metal as a hooked rope ladder latches onto the hull. And just like that, men armed with AK-47s are boarding your vessel. It's terrifying, it's incredibly fast, and it's a scenario that has played out hundreds of times. Welcome to this explainer. We're going to zoom out from that intense Hollywood-style action for a minute to uncover the deeply complex, honestly heartbreaking socioeconomic triggers that inadvertently birthed a multi-million-dollar pirate enterprise. We really need to understand the why behind the weapons.
Now, what's fascinating here is the stark contrast between how the international community views these men and how the locals actually see them. To the rest of the world, these guys are ruthless, greedy gangsters who hold up billions of dollars in global trade. But locally, it's a completely different story. Many see them as absolute heroes, as modern-day Robin Hoods, as literally the last line of defense for a nation that had everything else stripped away from it. And that sets up the central paradox we're exploring today.
So, how did we get here? Let's dive into Section 1, the collapse of a nation. Back in 1960, Somalia actually gained independence and unified. But that stability, it really didn't last long. By 1969, a military coup brought in a harsh dictatorship that used clan identities to divide the citizens. But 1991 is the absolute turning point. The Civil War peaked, the dictator was ousted, and the central government entirely, totally collapsed. The country was left without laws, without leadership, and without defense. The aftermath of 1991 was devastating. We are talking absolute desperation for the Somali people. Within just a single year, an estimated 350,000 people died from starvation, disease, and clan-based violence. The infrastructure just vanished. And here is the kicker for our story. The National Coast Guard completely ceased operations. Somalia has the longest coastline in mainland Africa, with incredibly rich and biodiverse waters, and suddenly, it was left completely unguarded.
Which brings us right to Section 2, the plundering of the unprotected seas.
Once the world realized nobody was watching Somalia's waters, the exploitation began immediately. An estimated $300 million worth of seafood was being stolen from the Somali coastline every single year by foreign fleets. With zero Coast Guard around to stop them, vessels from all over the globe rushed in to just take whatever they could. And it wasn't just theft, it was absolute destruction. These foreign vessels were illegally harvesting massive amounts of tuna and shrimp. Worse than that, they used these heavy steel dragnets that scraped the seafloor, ripping up and destroying vital coral reefs that all the marine life depended on. When local impoverished Somali fishermen went out in their small boats and tried to protest or protect their waters, these massive foreign vessels simply overpowered them. They literally attacked the locals with high-pressure water cannons and live bullets. The Somalis were being entirely robbed of their primary source of food and income.
But illegal fishing wasn't even the only threat. I want you to keep this incredibly low number, $2.50, in your head because it's the dark economic engine behind a massive environmental crime.
European companies were facing a huge bill of about $250 per ton to properly dispose of toxic waste back home. But if they sailed down to an unpoliced Somalia, they found they could dump it for just $2.50 a ton. They struck deals with local warlords, literally bribing them with weapons in exchange for the right to dump deadly waste. We're talking uranium, lead, cadmium, and mercury straight into Somali waters. Now, this secret dumping stayed largely hidden underwater right up until December 2004, when that massive tsunami hit the Indian Ocean. The sheer force of the tsunami shattered those underwater toxic waste containers, washing pure radiation and heavy metals straight onto the Somali shores. The result was just horrifying. Local doctors started reporting massive spikes in acute respiratory infections, bleeding gums, really unusual skin rashes, and unprecedented cancer rates. This environmental disaster pushed the local population way past the breaking point. It acted as the ultimate catalyst for desperate fishermen to finally arm themselves. And that desperation evolved into Section 3, the business of piracy.
It is absolutely crucial to understand that they did not start out as pirates in the traditional sense. They started by attacking those illegal foreign vessels simply to defend their home. In fact, they adopted the name Badadinta Bada, which translates to the saviors of the sea. They genuinely saw themselves as a volunteer Coast Guard, stepping up because their government couldn't. They'd capture illegal fishing ships and demand money to release them.
Because they didn't have a central government to collect tariffs or issue fines, they viewed these extortions as a sort of legitimate tax that foreign ships owed their ruined nation. But once they realized how insanely lucrative this could be and how defenseless, massive commercial cargo ships were compared to the armed fishing vessels, well, the mission shifted away from protection and purely toward profit.
What started as a makeshift Coast Guard industrialized into a formal, highly structured business model almost overnight. 50% of a ransom went straight to the pirates who executed the hijacking, 33% went to the investors and financiers, and yes, there were literal local stock exchanges where everyday residents could fund pirate missions by providing cash, weapons, or fuel. The remaining 17% was split among guards, translators, banknote checkers, and, remarkably, local charity for the poor and disabled. This economic ecosystem is exactly why the locals viewed them as Robin Hood figures. The sheer scale of this enterprise became just staggering. In 2008, they hijacked a Saudi supertanker the size of 3 aircraft carriers for a $3 million ransom. In 2013, a Greek tanker fetched $9.5 million. These huge cash drops were literally parachuted right onto the decks of hijacked ships. By 2011, piracy had completely transformed into Somalia's #1 industry, causing an estimated $7 billion in global economic damages. $7 billion gets a lot of attention, leading us to Section 4, the fall and resurgence. The world obviously couldn't ignore billions of dollars in losses, so a multinational effort brought in naval warships from the US, EU, NATO, India, and China to patrol the waters. But interestingly enough, the military wasn't the biggest deterrent. The real game changer was commercial ships hiring their own armed private security guards. Because pirates approached in those small speedboats we talked about earlier, guards high up on the cargo ships could easily target their engines before they even got close. These tactics were so successful that they virtually eliminated successful commercial hijackings between 2017 and 2023. But the story isn't over. Geopolitics shifted yet again. The 2023 Hamas-Israel war forced the U.S. Navy to divert its attention toward Houthi rebels in Yemen, leaving the Somali coast vulnerable once more. The pirates immediately seized the opportunity, leading to a shocking resurgence. A cargo vessel was hijacked in late 2023, and a Bangladeshi ship was taken for a $5 million ransom in early 2024. And, in a wildly surprising twist, in November 2024, a Chinese fishing ship was hijacked with the active help of its own armed security guards, who actually decided to join forces with the pirates. Which brings us to our final section: villains or saviors. Despite the undeniable violence, the extortion, and the shift from coastal protection into pure organized crime, an overwhelming 70% of locals still view these actions as a necessary defense of their exploited waters. Because when your alternative is starvation or toxic poisoning, legality really just becomes a luxury. And that leaves us with a really profound question. While the international community has spent millions deploying warships and armed guards to fight the pirates, the thousands of tons of toxic waste dumped in Somalia remain completely uncleaned. To this very day, no compensation has ever been paid to the innocent locals who lost their livelihoods to illegal fishing or their health to European radioactive waste. I want to leave you with this thought. Understanding the painful, desperate origins of this crisis doesn't excuse the violent crimes these syndicates continue to commit today. However, it proves a vital point. Unaddressed global exploitation is always going to create devastating, unforeseen ripple effects. If the world is willing to spend billions of dollars to protect its cargo, but absolutely nothing to clean up the toxic waste it left behind, who are the real pirates in this story?